You wake up, and the stone floor feels cold under your bare feet. The torchlight flickers and throws long shadows on the chamber walls where old, dusty tapestries hang. The air smells like damp wool. Your heart pounds hard, like a blacksmith hammering iron. Each beat is loud in the silence, broken only by the wind howling through the arrow slits. You are only 18, slender and delicate like a reed, wrapped in a stiff brocade gown that scrapes harshly against your skin. The shiny threads look like moonlight, but feel heavy, like chains pulling you down. The door creaks open, and a man twice your age steps in. His breath smells of wine from the feast below. His eyes are heavy with the weight of kingdoms. This is not a dream of love. This is your wedding night. Fear curls inside your stomach like a snake. Tonight your innocence will be used to seal alliances written in ink and blood. Your body will be a vessel for heirs not yet born. Failure whispers of shame, disgrace, or worse, the pain of childbirth that could take your life before dawn. Before we dive into these hidden stories of survival and suffering, if you like learning about the secret truths of history, hit that like button and subscribe. And please leave a comment to tell me where in the world you're listening from. I find it amazing that we're exploring these ancient stories together from so many places, connected across time and space by curiosity about the past. In the weak light of a single candle, its flame fighting against the draft through the old cracks of the castle, a girl named Matilda stands still. Her small hands clutch the edge of a wooden chest carved with imperial eagles. Born around 1100 to 1102 AD in the royal court of England, she always knew her life was not her own. Her father, King Henry I, ruler of lands from Normandy's misty shores to the hills of Wales, did not see her as a daughter to love, but as a piece in the game of alliances. By 1109 AD, when she was just 7, envoys from the Holy Roman Empire arrived with a marriage offer from Emperor Henry V, a man in his 20s, hardened by battles and eager for power. He wanted to join his empire with England through marriage. The betrothal was sealed in Utrecht on April 10, 1110 AD. Matilda was sent across the Channel to Germany, a land of thick forests and tall cathedrals, where the air smelled of pine and blacksmiths' hammers echoed in endless wars. Under Archbishop Bruno of Trier, she learned the harsh German language, the complex dances of court life, and the heavy weight of a crown waiting for her. But behind the lessons of Latin prayers and fine embroidered silks, dread grew inside her. She never said it out loud, not even to the stone saints in the chapel. What child could understand what was expected of a wife? To give her body to a stranger, in a room with no privacy, with people hiding behind curtains, to prove the marriage was real. The wedding came on January 7, 1114 AD, in the great cathedral of Mainz. The arches reached high, like the ambitions of the men who planned it. Matilda, now 18, walked down the aisle in a crimson velvet gown, heavy with gold thread that rubbed her skin raw. Her veil was a thin barrier between her and the staring nobles gathered from across the empire. The air sware with incense smoke, curling around the altar. Vows were exchanged in Latin, words she knew but did not truly understand. Henry V, tall and stern, his face marked with scars from war, held her hand with a grip of ownership, not love, as the bells rang through the Rhine Valley. The procession went to the imperial palace. There were feasts of roasted boar and spiced wine, but underneath was tension. That night, in a chamber decorated with tapestries of conquests, the reality came. Servants stripped the bed, preparing for the ritual to prove her purity and his strength. It was a custom obsessed with heirs. Matilda's pulse raced hard, her breath was shallow, as cold air raised goosebumps on her skin. The emperor, his breath heavy with meat, approached her with the entitlement of a man used to command. No record tells of her tears or protests; those were erased. But the imbalance of power was clear. She was just a girl,
12 years old, giving herself to a man of 28, her body not ready for what was demanded. For the empire, this night sealed an alliance, but for Matilda, it ended her childhood. It was the first scar in a life full of politics. Years later, when Henry V died childless on May 23, 1125 AD in Utrecht, leaving Matilda a widow at 23, the empty marriage haunted her. No heirs had come, maybe because of her young age, maybe because of Henry's failing health after years of war. When she returned to her father's court in Normandy, she carried the title of Empress, but it was only a hollow crown, making her loneliness worse. At court, whispers blamed her barrenness, calling it a curse. That shame turned into her resolve in future fights for the English throne. Yet in those early nights, lying in silk sheets, she feared more than pain. She feared failing to give sons, the one duty that dynasties demanded. It was a burden that would shape her entire legacy. Across the channel, in the sunny vineyards of Aquitaine, another young heiress faced the same fate. Her world smelled of lavender and the salty Atlantic breeze. Eleanor, born around 1122 AD in the rich court of Poitiers, inherited one of Europe's wealthiest duchies when her father died in 1137 AD. At just 15, she was lively, with golden hair like autumn leaves and eyes sharp as a hawk. But her great inheritance made her a prize to be claimed. Rivals circled, ready to take her lands. On his deathbed, King Louis VI of France arranged her marriage to his son, Louis VII, so Aquitaine's vast lands, from the Pyrenees to the Loire, would join with the French crown. The marriage was hurried and solemnized on July 25, 1137 AD, in the Cathedral of Saint-André in Bordeaux. The summer heat mixed with the smell of beeswax candles and fresh rushes on the floor. Eleanor, dressed in sapphire blue silk embroidered with golden lions, spoke her vows before French and Aquitanian lords. Their armor clinked softly in the pews. Louis, 17 and deeply pious, looked more monk than king. His pale face trembled as he slid the ring onto her finger. The feast that followed was filled with roasted peacocks and troubadour songs, but Eleanor's mind wandered to the chamber waiting for them. Its canopy bed stood ready, a symbol of the duty ahead. As dusk fell across the Garonne River, attendants led the couple to their quarters. The bedding ceremony was old tradition. Priests blessed the mattress. Courtiers toasted with goblets of spiced wine, wishing them fertility. Eleanor's heart raced beneath her linen shift, the fabric clinging to her in the humid night. Louis, shy and awkward, approached her with hesitation. His devotion to the church fought against the worldly duties of kingship. Some chronicles say he was reluctant, seeing pleasure as sin. Eleanor faced the night with curiosity mixed with fear. The pressure was heavy. Without sons, her position as duchess was fragile. The marriage gave them only daughters, Marie in 1445 AD and Alex in 1550 AD. Louis grew doubtful, Eleanor grew frustrated. At court in Paris, whispers grew louder. Her spirited nature clashed with his piety. She loved poetry and hunting. He loved fasting and prayers. During the Second Crusade from 1147 to 1149 AD, the marriage nearly broke apart in Antioch. Rumors spread about her closeness with her uncle Raymond. Whether true or not, it fed scandal. By 1152 AD, at Beaugency, near Orléans, their marriage was annulled. Officially, it was because of consanguinity, being too closely related, but everyone knew the real reasons were deeper. Eleanor, now 30, came out of the failed marriage stronger. Just weeks later, on May 18, 1152 AD, she married Henry II of England and Poitiers. With him, she had 8 children and built the Angevin Empire. But on that first night in Bordeaux, her fear was raw. The fear of a stranger's embrace, the fear of failing to give heirs, and the constant dread of childbirth, where fevers and bleeding killed women as easily as swords killed men in war. Eleanor's resilience would later make her queen of both France and England, but the memory of that wedding night stayed with her, a shadow behind her famous independence. Far to the north, along the foggy coasts of Flanders, another story began. It was one of defiance, told over the noise of looms weaving the region's famous cloth. Matilda, born around 1031 AD to Count Baldwin V of
Matilda of Flanders, daughter of Baldwin V and Adela of France, grew up in a busy court filled with merchants and diplomats. The air always smelled of sea salt and freshly dyed wool. By her late teens, she caught the eye of William, Duke of Normandy, a bastard son who rose to power through sheer toughness. His illegitimacy was a stain that blocked him from many noble matches. Later storytellers added drama, saying Matilda once refused him, declaring she'd never marry a bastard, and William dragged her by her hair through the muddy streets of Bruges until she gave in. Historians dismiss that as myth, probably Norman propaganda, but the truth was dramatic enough. Their betrothal, in 1049 AD, drew papal anger, since they were distant cousins. The Church had rules against close relatives marrying to prevent inbreeding. At the Council of Rheims in 1049 AD, Pope Leo IX banned their union, and the delay tested William's patience. Matilda, 20 years old, felt the strain. In her chambers at Bruges, lavender sachets tried to calm her nerves. Her ladies whispered about the Duke's temper, hardened in Norman rebellions, and the risks of defying Rome. Excommunication loomed, a spiritual death in a time when salvation meant everything. The wedding finally took place in 1051 AD, probably at Eau in Normandy. It was quiet, held in defiance of the ban, vows exchanged in a chapel overlooking the Channel's restless waves. That night, in a hall warmed by oak log fires, the consummation happened under the shadow of the Pope's disapproval. Matilda's soft, Flemish linen gown slipped away. Her husband's calloused warrior hands reminded her of the life she'd entered. Her fear was not violence, but uncertainty. Would their children be cursed as illegitimate, their dynasty doomed? To appease the Church, William and Matilda later founded two abbeys in Caen, the Abbey of Saint-Étienne and the Abbey of La Trinité. And in 1059, Pope Nicholas II granted them dispensation. Matilda went on to bear 9 or 10 children, including William Rufus and Henry I. Her fertility was a victory over her early fears. As Duchess and later Queen after the conquest of 1066 AD, she governed Normandy when William was away. Her seal appeared on charters, proof of her shared authority. Yet that uneasy wedding night echoed years later in their quarrels, like the fight in 1079 with their son, Robert Curthose. Family bonds often cracked under politics. In her final days at Caen in 883 AD, Matilda confessed her sins, maybe even those first doubts. She died on November 2nd, leaving William grief-stricken. He followed her to the grave 4 years later. Now eastward, to Paris, its grand halls rich with spices from distant ports, the Seine's waters lapping against stone quays. Here Isabella was born around 1295 AD, daughter of King Philip IV of France and Joan I of Navarre. Raised in the Louvre, with gardens in bloom and music in the air, she was fair-hired, intelligent, and destined for a throne. By 1307 AD, her fate was sealed. Marriage to Edward II of England meant to mend tensions over Gascony, the last English lands in France. At 12, Isabella crossed the Channel in January 1308. Her ship battled winter storms before docking at Boulogne-sur-Mer. On January 25th, her wedding was held in the town cathedral. The air was heavy with frankincense, knights gleaming in armor. Isabella wore a silver gown with a gauze veil as she spoke vows with Edward, then 23. He was handsome, with Plantagenet features softened by his love for theater and the arts. But joy soured quickly. At the banquet, Edward showered gifts not on Isabella, but on Piers Gaveston, his favorite.
He even seated Piers beside him, leaving Isabella sidelined. Her uncles fumed at the insult. That night, in a chamber warmed by charcoal braziers, attendants performed the bedding ceremony. Curtains were drawn around the bed, priests murmured blessings. Isabella's fear was clear, the cold draft on her skin, the weight of Edward's indifference. His eyes looked far away, as though on another. Chronicles say his devotion to Gaveston meant the marriage may not have been consummated that night, or if it was, it left her unfulfilled. Political whispers soon grew louder. Without sons, Isabella's position was shaky. Her body was watched constantly for signs of pregnancy. Eventually, children came. Edward III in 1312 at Windsor, and 3 more. But resentment lingered. By 1325 AD, sent to France to negotiate peace, Isabella refused to return to England, scared that Edward's new favorites, the Despensers, might have her killed. Instead, she allied with Roger Mortimer and invaded England in 1326 AD. Together, they deposed Edward II and ruled as regents until 1330 AD, when her own son took power. She spent her later years quietly at Castle Rising in Norfolk, until her death on August 22, 1358 AD. But the humiliation of her wedding night never left her. It burned inside, fueling her transformation from pawn to powerful player. In the green fields of Anjou, where the Loire River wound through vineyards heavy with grapes, Margaret was born on March 23, 1430 AD, to René of Anjou and Isabella of Lorraine. Her childhood was filled with the Renaissance stirrings of art and learning, preparing her for the tangled web of European diplomacy. By 1444 AD, as the Hundred Years' War dragged on towards stalemate, English envoys proposed her marriage to King Henry VI. He was pious but fragile, and the marriage was meant to secure a truce. At just 15, Margaret carried the hope of peace, her dowry a modest 20,000 francs, balanced by the cession of Maine. She arrived in England on April 9, 1445 AD, her ship docking at Portsmouth, greeted by cheering crowds and the salty tang of the Solent. The wedding took place on April 23 at Titchfield Abbey in Hampshire. It was a modest Cistercian house, the vows spoken before an altar draped in white samite. Margaret wore satin embroidered with gold, her dark hair bound in pearls. Henry, 23, gentle and soft-handed from prayer rather than swordplay, stood opposite her. The feast overflowed with sugar sculptures shaped like lions and eagles, but political tension hung in the air, watched closely by powerful nobles. That night, in the abbey's guest quarters, with monks' chants echoing through the walls, the consummation happened. Henry's fragile mind, his touch hesitant, seemed to foreshadow the breakdowns that would later ruin him. The scent of beeswax and herbs filled the room, while Margaret's heart trembled at the unknown, a foreign land, a fragile husband, and the crushing duty to bear heirs in a divided court. No immediate pregnancy came. Their son, Edward, was only born in 1453 AD at Westminster, and suspicions of illegitimacy swirled because Henry had already fallen into catatonia. The marriage's political weight pressed on her like an iron chain. By 1455 AD, acting as regent during Henry's insanity, she called councils at Coventry, decisions that helped ignite the Wars of the Roses. Defeat at Tewkesbury in 1471 AD saw her son killed, Henry murdered, and Margaret herself imprisoned, until ransomed to France in 1475 AD. She died in poverty on August 25, 1482 AD at Dampierre-sur-Loire. Her wedding night's fears had bloomed into a lifetime of war, her resolve forged in the fire of that first vulnerability. Far in the Welsh marshes, where mist clung to valleys like a shroud, another Margaret story began, Margaret Beaufort. She was born on May 31, 1443 AD at Bletsoe Castle in Bedfordshire. Descended from John of Gaunt's legitimized line, she inherited great estates, making her a prize ward. In 1455 AD, King Henry VI granted her in marriage to his half-brother Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, to strengthen the Lancastrian cause. At just 15, Margaret married Edmund on November 1, 1455 AD, probably at her manor in Lamphy, Pembrokeshire. The ceremony was simple, held amid Yorkist unrest. The chamber was dim, lit by rushlights in iron holders, smelling of peat smoke and dried rosemary. Edmund, 24, and hardened by battle, consummated the marriage quickly, his urgency fueled by dynastic need. Margaret's terror was real and raw, the pain of her young body, cold sweat on her brow, fear of what this act meant for her life. Pregnant by early 1456 AD, she was widowed within months when Edmund died of plague on November 3rd at Carmarthen Castle. Left alone at Pembroke Castle, she gave birth on January 28, 1457 AD. At just 13, her labor nearly destroyed her, leaving scars that made her barren forever. Her son Henry, future king, was her only child, a miracle born of trauma. She remarried twice for safety, to Henry Stafford in 1458 at Maxstoke Castle, and later to Thomas Stanley in 1472 at Knowsley Hall. Through cunning and patience, she guided Henry's rise to the throne. By her death on June 29, 1509 AD at Westminster, she had shaped Tudor England and founded colleges. But the shadow of her wedding night never faded. It stood as proof of the era's harshest cruelties. These stories, drawn from history's threads, reveal the silent horrors behind crowns. Queens bound by duty's iron grip faced wedding nights haunted by fear, their bodies bartered for power, their spirits tested by expectation. Yet, from this darkness came resilience. Their struggles echo across centuries, reminding us that even in the hush of a medieval bedchamber, the human heart has always beaten against chains, defiant in the night.